We've got exclusive new reporting tonight on how one of America's biggest investment banks is profiting on the war in Ukraine. Goldman Sachs. They say they are winding down operations in Russia, which is partially true, because at the very same time, they're actively trading Russian debt to U.S. clients, mostly hedge funds, and they're using a legal loophole to do it. A Goldman Sachs spokesperson tells us this: we have a robust system and control throughout our organization to ensure we are not trading with sanctioned counterparties, which is true.
Another classic case of watch what they do, not what they say. Goldman said that they are winding down in their relations with Russia, but in the meantime, they're lining their pockets by selling Russia's debt to U.S. investors. Just because they're not trading with sanctioned counterparties doesn't make it okay to cash in on a crisis. The worst part is, if you Google what companies have pulled out of Russia, you will see Goldman Sachs listed in almost every article. While they pretend to be on the right side of history in the public eye, this really exposes their true identity. This is a perfect time for America to see the real Goldman Sachs and where their priorities lie. Better late than never. It says a lot that McDonald's, IKEA, and Shell made it out of Russia faster than Goldman Sachs.
What is this loophole? How is this happening?
So what happened is when the Biden administration put in sanctions on Russian debt, basically on the major financial institutions of Russia, they left open a window, and Goldman Sachs has driven a truck through it. And basically what that window is that U.S. institutions are banned from trading Russian debt with those Russian banks that have been sanctioned, but not banned from what's called secondary trade. So if that debt was already issued to somebody else and they want to sell it to a U.S. buyer, a U.S. debt holder of Russia to a U.S. buyer, Goldman Sachs is acting as a brokerage. And the government, the Biden administration, has left that loophole open with the basic idea that companies here in this country, institutions in this country that hold Russian debt ought to be able to get rid of it. But at the same time, there are a lot of buyers for what is now seen as cheap debt. And Goldman Sachs has been advertising that to its clients and basically saying, hey, come on board while this debt is cheap. It's going to eventually go up later and you'll make a killing.
Even if you do trade debt in the secondary market with an unsanctioned counterparty, how would you know where the money goes? The answer is simple. You don't. NBC News recently reported, in most cases, the buyers do not know the identities of the sellers, and no regulation requires brokers to disclose their identities publicly. It's bad enough that Goldman Sachs is profiting off of a war. It's even worse that the other half of that transaction could be pumping the bags of Putin's cronies. This loophole exists because OFAC said it's okay to trade Russian assets in secondary markets. Just because the money isn't flowing through Russia's banks doesn't mean it can't end up in Putin's pocket.
Okay, and that's what we need to explain. The idea, hey, let people still trade this so they can close out their positions so there's not chaos in the market, that's really getting abused, because what they are doing is trading hundreds of millions of bonds. Goldman Sachs is going out and pitching trade ideas, market dislocations to distressed hedge funds who are looking to buy something cheap in a crisis. And that's what they do. But this isn't a regular crisis. It's not a company going bankrupt. It is a war. And let's remind you, when you buy Russian government bonds, you are now lending to the Russian government. And when you buy Russian corporate bonds, you are helping that company succeed. So right now, Goldman Sachs is making markets and making money, which is certainly not in line with the spirit of the headline, we are winding down and leaving Russia.
Stephanie Ruhle is a real journalist, and I applaud her take on this. She really hit it on the head. While countless companies are pulling out of Russia, trying to set an example, Goldman Sachs is spitting in the face of this effort and helping Russia at the same time. And this just in. No statement from Goldman Gary. Shocker. But the big news happened today on Crypto Banner when Raoul Pal let Rand know that his backchannel sources are telling him not one, but possibly 3 physical Bitcoin Spot ETFs will be announced later this year, with some of them happening as early as April. You've got to listen to this.
So you're thinking, or your back sources, I mean, let's not call them back sources, but you're thinking that there may be a Bitcoin ETF as soon as April, a physical Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah, April, May. But April there's at least 2 in April with Bitwise and another one. We're getting very close. And, Gensler's statement this week or last week, whenever it was, I've lost track, was very positive for this kind of stuff, which is, we get it, it's here, it's not going away, we'll regulate it carefully. It's just all the right steps.
Now, I've had Raoul Pal on this channel before, and I can tell you, he is a very connected individual and a straight shooter. He's so bullish on Ethereum that 80% of his crypto portfolio is tied up in ETH. But Bitcoin is still the market mover, and Raoul knows that. He also agrees with my assessment that the executive order from Biden this week was very bullish, and regulators like Goldman Gary need to fall in line and create sustainable regulation. But regulating through lawsuits, which is what the SEC has been doing the past few years. Jordy Alexander also weighed in on how he thinks the Bitcoin Spot ETF might move the markets later in the year.
I think it would be obviously a big catalyst, but that's not the catalyst I'm expecting. And the way that I'm expecting Bitcoin to turn up is not because people are going to get greedy and try to dive in. I think there's going to be an adoption cycle that's going to start being very strong, and that will kind of get a lot of momentum itself. I don't think it's going to be driven because people have a lot of money around and they're just kind of, want to allocate it to Bitcoin. People will start seeing the Bitcoin chart run away from them, and they'll be forced to get back on the train.
Remember, one of my core philosophies is having a long-term mindset. That's going to be crucial this year. Don't be one of those investors wrapped up in a FOMO suit that starts putting their money in at the wrong time. Comment below with who you think should replace Gary Gensler. Smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That's all I got. Be blessed. Boy out.